So, who was James Conant? Now, the chances are pretty good that you've never heard of him, and yet he's a man who has affected everything you know about the modern world. The fact that you don't know who he was doesn't mean that he hasn't. If you've gone to college, James Conant is a part of your life, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. Anyone ever talks about him today. So, who was he? James Conant was born on March 26, 1893, and he died on February 11th, 1978. James Conant was an engraver's son, a boy who grew up in Dorchester, which is part of Boston. A boy from the other side of the tracks who had grand aspirations in life. And he was fortunate to have mentors in his life who guided him. He was a bright boy who was intensely interested in chemistry. With the help of his high school mentor, he was able to gain acceptance into Harvard University in 1910. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1913 and a PhD in chemistry in 1916. His goals in life were to be a leading chemist, to be the president of Harvard, and to be appointed to a U.S. presidential cabinet position. And he achieved two of those goals. He became president of Harvard in 1933 at the tender age of 40. Now, traditionally, Harvard had been a school for rich boys, especially Boston Brahmins, the so-called elite upper crust of New England society. James Conant desired to change this. Coming from a non-elite background, he felt Harvard University should open its doors to bright people regardless of their circumstances in life. He also felt that Harvard should spread its wings and accept bright young men from across the United States and the world. He had definite ideas. He didn't see Harvard so much as a club for good old boys, but as an elite competitive institution on the same level as the elite institutions in Germany, which he so admired, and rightfully so. The best chemists and scientists in the world in that day were coming out of Germany, and he felt that the United States should be equal in academic caliber to those schools. Now, this is what he sought in life, and he was able to achieve these goals. And this was unfortunate for the rest of us. There are themes that run through our lives, even if we don't see them ourselves. James Conant ultimately became a facilitator in the use of weapons of mass destruction. He accomplished this with poison gas during World War I, the employment of the SAT exam in the 30s and 40s, and the development of nuclear weapons, of course, in the 1940s. Prior to ascending to the presidency of Harvard, he was a student, a teacher, and then a professor. Shortly after graduating from Harvard in 1916, World War I came to him, and his participation in the war involved the manufacture of poison gas, specifically lewisite, as a weapon of mass destruction. Now, lewisite is a man-made arsenic-based chemical weapon. It is an oily liquid that causes severe skin burns, blisters, and lung damage instantly upon contact. Pure lewisite is clear and odorless, but impure versions look dark and smell like geranium flowers. After the war and a return to normalcy, James Conant focused on his other goal, which was to become the president of Harvard. Over the next 15 years, he assiduously acquired the skills and contacts to achieve this goal, which was not an easy feat. Harvard University, you see, at the time, and today also, is the private toy of the ruling elite in the United States of America. And they would like to keep it that way. They're not going to let just anyone become the president of Harvard. They have to make sure that they can trust you. And they aren't going to let a wild card or a loose cannon come in and mix things up unless they're sure that is what they want. And what they wanted in that day was to extend their power and range over America and then the world. It is the guiding board of Harvard, known as the corporation, which ultimately chooses Harvard's leadership. And this board, they ask a lot of questions. James Conant did not come into the presidency of Harvard with his plans unannounced. There was no sneak attack. The corporation knew full well what his plans were. Upon receiving the presidency, he set out to reform Harvard University and make it a national and international institution. To help him achieve his goal of a more egalitarian Harvard and one that selected the best and brightest, he relied extensively on the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which had been developed a few years earlier, in the 1920s. It's fair to say that James Conant was a believer in metrics, and this set him on his second foray into the facilitation of weapons of mass destruction, which is the concept of the best and the brightest as determined by standardized testing. The best and brightest as defined by what? The implicit assumption in crowning students who have achieved a high SAT score and or a high GPA is that these people are also superior in their moral conduct. This is a false assumption. But this false assumption did not deter James Conant from ruthlessly positioning Harvard as an elite institution that only accepted the best teachers and the best students. Given the events that were transpiring in the world around him, it's fair to say that he was not unique in sharing the belief that Harvard should be such an institution. As James Conant was transforming Harvard, so were John McCloy, Dwight Eisenhower, Allen Dulles, Averell Harriman, and Henry Cabot Lodge transforming America to the status of an international, sovereign, and busybody about town. Their goal was to enforce a Pax Americana upon the world. James Conant's vision dovetailed nicely with this vision and the work of his elite contemporaries. And so, if you are a Harvard student today and you come from the Midwest, from a small little town, you can thank James Conant for your lofty status. Or, in contrast, if you are a farmer from Oregon who didn't attend college at all, but had the misfortune of losing an older brother who died in Vietnam, Afghanistan, or Iraq, you too can thank James Conant. Or, if you are a housewife in 2026 who is struggling to put food on the table because of runaway inflation, you too can thank James Conant. Or, if you are a poor schmuck picking up the pieces of your shattered life because your loved one died in a poorly built Boeing aircraft because an Ivy League educated master of the universe at Boeing placed his profits above your safety, you too can thank James Conant. Now, of course, James Conant certainly didn't intend for people to suffer. He did desire to make the world a better place. But did he? I think it's fair to say that James Conant did more to destroy the United States than the Russians, the Chinese, or any amount of nuclear weapons could possibly do. Once a bomb maker, always a bomb maker. Once a maker of weapons of mass destruction, always a maker of weapons of mass destruction. As they say, themes run through a person's life. Prior to his career as a professor at Harvard, James Conant undertook a foray into the world of business. With two of his college chums, Chauncey Loomis and Stanley Pennick, in tow, he started a company, LPC, which was designed to provide organic chemicals, such as benzene, for the federal government. There was a war on in Europe, and so the need existed for cheap chemicals. As such, the three men, after burning their first factory in Queens to the ground, set up a factory in New Jersey. This second factory blew up, claiming the life of Stanley Pennock and two other men. Loomis escaped, but with severe injuries. Conant had been delivering a lecture in Boston. Later, a post-mortem analysis of the explosion revealed flaws in the testing procedure, which Conant admitted was no one's fault except my own. We'll put that in quotes. Was no one's fault except my own. That comes from James B. Conant, Harvard to Hiroshima, by James Hirschberg. Years later, when Conant became the president of Harvard, his mother gave words of encouragement to those who were doubters that he would do a good job as president. She said he would construct a chemical equation and everything would come out right. And this also comes from the same book that I listed before by James Hirschberg. He won't get excited. Everything works out by formula. He'll compound his formula for running the university and then stand over it while it develops into substance. That was Jeanette Bryant Conant on her son's selection as Harvard's president. Well, I'm sure that was his hope. Seems like a reasonable hope. And so James Conant, the chemist, constructed a chemical equation in which he married three conceptual compounds. A, the notion of the best and brightest, and B, a mathematical methodology, the SAT, to determine who was best and brightest, and C, a willing elite institution, Harvard, that would accept and anoint these best and brightest. These chemical compounds were immersed in a reagent known as Kim Jong-un, which is a reagent that endows superhuman powers upon an individual person or institution, in this case, Harvard University. How can you go wrong with selecting the best and brightest and bring them together at one institution called Harvard? Well, an implicit assumption of this chemistry experiment is that you're getting the best and brightest. Another implicit assumption is that people of such supposed higher intelligence will have a higher moral quotient. A third fatal assumption is that America will continue to live within the moral constraints of a godly society in which some sense of noblesse oblige exists. Unfortunately, all assumptions proved false, and the result was a toxic gas that continues to poison America today. Since the inception of Conant's chemistry experiment, American wealth has become more polarized, homelessness has grown, and the economic fortune of the average American has grown more dismal as the decades have rolled by. Moreover, America has become a militarized police and surveillance state focused on war. And it was the militarization of science, spearheaded by James Conant, that has enabled our rapacious war economy that sucks the rest of the government dry. Sorry, no SNAP benefits for you. There's a war on, don't you know? People who score higher on aptitude tests are not automatically entitled to unbridled wealth and riches. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. Yet it is only natural that our leaders would think such. A world unhinged from godliness produces social Darwinism, in which leaders and workers are not created equal in the eyes of the Creator. In such a world, leaders are superior because they are more biologically advanced, as evidenced by the SAT, notwithstanding the leader's inability to place a screw efficiently into a sheet of gypsum board. It might be worthwhile at this point to mention a few facts about the SAT exam. The SAT exam was developed by Carl Campbell Brigham, a Princeton psychologist and a practicer of psychometrics. Born into an elite family whose members regularly attended Harvard, Carl shunned Harvard for Princeton University. In addition to creating the SAT, he was also an advisory board member for the American Eugenics Society. And it was his writings which heavily influenced the eugenics movement in the early 1900s. Certainly, James Conant knew who he was. Indeed, he embraced Carl Campbell Brigham and his concept of the SAT as a valid means of determining who were the best and brightest. The American Eugenics Society was famous for its anti-immigration policies, advocacy of sterilization programs, which were instituted in the United States, and its support for Margaret Sanger and her policies of abortion, which affected predominantly people of lower socioeconomic status. The SAT, while seemingly innocuous, is not innocuous at all. It is a tool of the elites to marginalize undesirables and people of supposedly lesser worth. To understand this, we must understand psychometrics and where it comes from. The field of psychometrics was founded by Knave Francis Galton in the late 1800s. Knave Francis was also the founder of the Victorian eugenics movement. He was the half-cousin of Charles Darwin. Psychometrics is the field of study concerned with the theory and technique of psychological measurement. It focuses on the objective quantification of observable latent traits, such as intelligence, personality, abilities, and attitudes, using mathematical and statistical models. Your modern SAT exam is a result and an extension of psychometrics. In recent years, Knave Francis has received significant criticism for being a proponent of social Darwinism, eugenics, and biological racism. Indeed, he was a pioneer of eugenics, coining the term himself in 1883. Galton is credited with popularizing the phrase nature versus nurture to frame the academic discussion regarding the relative influence of heredity and environment on human ability and social advancement. It's not surprising that Knave Francis would be a proponent of social Darwinism. Charles Darwin was the inspiration behind Francis Galton, a scientist who advanced the development of psychometrics. In 1859, Darwin published his book on the origin of species. Darwin described the role of natural selection in the emergence over time of different populations of species of plants and animals. The book showed how individual members of species differ among themselves and how they possess characteristics that are more or less adaptive to their environment. Those with more adaptive characteristics are more likely to survive to procreate and give rise to another generation. Those with less adaptive characteristics are less likely. These ideas stimulated Galton's interest in the study of human beings and how they differ from one another and how to measure those differences. Thus, psychometrics, thus Carl Campbell Brigham, thus the SAT. Charles Darwin, Knave Francis Galton, Carl Campbell Brigham did much to unhinge God from our modern world. In the 1800s, people were souls, not just biological humans. When the Titanic sunk in 1912, souls were lost, not bodies. A person was more than a pound of flesh. According to Google AI, in the 1800s, people used souls instead of bodies to count individuals because a person's spiritual value, community identity were tied to their eternal soul, reflecting a deeply religious worldview where humans were seen first as spiritual beings rather than physical forms. In the godless world of today, we are the captains of our own fate. We got to where we got because of ourselves, not because of God's grace. This is the world we now live in, a godless world led by a godless institution, Harvard University. And this godless university is led by Übermenches. And Übermensch is a German word for superman. These are the kind of men James Conant admired. Unfortunately, a man with a higher IQ is not necessarily a man with a higher MQ or moral quotient. In fact, there might be a good argument for the reverse. For if it is known that the keys to the kingdom will go to the man who scores highest on the SAT, then it invites people to game the system and to maliciously seek that higher score in order to win those keys to the kingdom. This man may not have any MQ at all. Such was the case just a few years ago when Mr. Mark Riddell, a Harvard graduate and test-taking whiz, sold his prodigious skills to those applicants unlikely to gain admittance to our elite, put quotes around that, national universities. In simple terms, Mr. Riddell took the test for them. The scandal, when exposed, was known as the Varsity Blues operation. Thank you, James Conant. Now, technically, James Conant's chemistry equation should work. And on paper, it does work. You throw into your Erlenmeyer flask a standardized test, a Kim Jong-un society where Harvard graduates reign supreme, a willing Harvard who will accept high achievers on the SAT, and presto, you get a beautiful compound of a more prosperous, enlightened society. But alas, in real life, the chemistry doesn't work. It's a chemistry experiment gone bad. As an addendum, it only seems fitting that we talk about the principal people who spearheaded the American Eugenics Society, given that the SAT had its roots in the eugenics movement. Here they are in all their white supremacy. Madison Grant. He was an American lawyer, zoologist, anthropologist, and writer known for his work as a conservationist, eugenicist, and as an advocate of scientific racism. Grant is less noted for his far-reaching achievements in conservation than for his pseudoscientific advocacy of Nordicism, a form of racism which views the Nordic race as superior. I guess that's why the Romans conquered the world, because of Nordic superiority. As a white supremacist, eugenicist, Grant was the author of The Passing of the Great Race, one of the most famous racist texts, a book Adolf Hitler referred to as his personal Bible. Grant also played an active role in crafting immigration, restriction, and anti-miscegenation laws in the United States. That's race mixing. Alma mater, Yale and Columbia Law. Irving Fisher was an American economist, statistician, inventor, eugenicist, and progressive social campaigner. He was one of the earliest American neoclassical economists, though his later work on debt deflation has been embraced by post-Keynesian school. Joseph Schumpeter described him as the greatest economist the United States has ever produced, an assessment later repeated by James Tobin and Milton Friedman. Alma mater, Yale, PhD. All I can say about that is, when you see a mathematician and his statistics, run for the hills. Henry Edward Crampton was an American evolutionary biologist and malacologist who specialized in land snails. Crampton undertook the first major study of evolution in nature in his research in the Society Islands. His alma mater, Columbia. Charles Benedict Davenport was a biologist and a eugenicist influential in the American eugenics movement. He taught at Harvard University and the University of Chicago. Davenport's research was guided by the racism and classicism of his time, which he bought into wholeheartedly, although he was one of the first scientists to recognize polygenic inheritance, the influence of many genes on a single trait. He continued to employ simple Mendelian models when convenient for making racist and classicist claims. His work drew more and more criticism over time. Eventually, only his most ardent admirers regarded his work as truly scientific. Davenport was particularly interested in race mixing, which he saw both as a phenomenon that could shed light on the workings of human heredity and as a threat to society. Alma mater, Harvard University. Harry Hamilton Laughlin was an American educator and eugenicist. He served as the superintendent of the Eugenics Record Office from its inception in 1910 to its closure in 1939, and was among the most active individuals influencing American eugenics policy, especially compulsory sterilization legislation. One of Laughlin's interests was to encourage the proliferation of compulsory sterilization legislation in the United States to sterilize the unfit members of the population. By 1914, 12 states had already passed sterilization laws, beginning with Indiana in 1907, Connecticut in 1909. However, the laws were not employed with significant vigor, with the exception of California. Where else? Alma mater, District Normal School, and Princeton University. Henry Field Osborne, Sr., was an American paleontologist, geologist, and eugenics advocate. He was professor of anatomy at Columbia University, president of the American Museum of Natural History for 25 years, and a co-founder of the American Eugenics Society. In addition to being an advocate of eugenics, he was an orthicist, viewing the white race as superior, and he supported immigration controls. Alma mater, Princeton University. Well, what do you know? They all came from the Ivy League. I never would have guessed.